join this event. And my apologies to the colleague from FAO, Valer. Actually, our presentations are rather connected. My name is Henrique Pacini. I work for UNCTAD, and together with a colleague, Glenn Wilson, who is also attending, we are implementing this program called Sustainable Manufacturing in Environmental Pollution, the logo that I have here on my background, which is an initiative founded by the UK that works in Africa and in South Asia, looking at two areas, basically manufacturing pollution and plastics pollution, and both affect water in a very large way. Those systems are connected to the agricultural system, so whatever is manufactured often comes from field, agricultural field, and the sad story is that there is water pollution in the agricultural part, and also in the industrial phase of transformation. And of course, the plastics issue is a whole problem because it's a persistent type of pollution. So I'm going to explain a bit, sharing my screen here with a brief presentation. My presentation will be more focused on the issue of plastic pollution because it's very tangible. It's easy to understand, and it's an area where we've been working as part of the SMEP program on especially on the aspect of material substitution. So changing plastics to other materials like aluminum, glass, cotton, jute, clay, materials based on agricultural residues. The important thing to know is that any material transition, so when you want to get out of plastic pollution, plastic bottles that litter in the environment, that litter our waterways, we always need to consider the consequences of the alternative. So if you're going to go for cotton bags, great, they are made of a natural material, they don't accumulate in nature that much, they biodegrade easier, but cotton bags take also a lot of water, they pollute a lot of water to be made. So this type of considerations are important both for industrialists and also for the government to be aware when designing laws, saying, okay, now we are banning certain types of plastic, or we are putting tariffs on a specific product or taxes locally in order to disincentivize something and incentivize an alternative. So, but the presentation will touch a bit on the program. So on the two strands of SMEP, on the plastics one and on the manufacturing pollution one, because both touch water. So I'll talk a bit about SMEP. I'll talk a bit about plastic pollution, the industrial pollution, transformation, and of course the impacts on water. And you can see on the right side of the screen a photo of a plastics recycling plant in the upper photo, and a photo of a tannery, so the leather production step I think this is from Bangladesh, which are both processes that can have a water impacts if not properly managed. So, but first, what is the impact of plastics on the oceans? Because often things that reach the water, that pollute water, end up in the oceans. That's the ultimate destination. And unfortunately, for many years, it has been the waste bin of humanity. So plastics and chemical pollution amount to very large quantities reaching the oceans. About 60% of all plastics produced every year reach the ocean. There are large ocean patches of pollution and hidden pollution in the bottom of the ocean. And this quantity is subject to debate, the quantity, but they are very large. It also affects the food system. So we have microplastics food that we eat, especially meat and fish. It affects marine fauna and flora. As you know, biodiversity is very important to keep ecosystem services, to keep nature as a filter to allow human activity without disease, without toxicities. But a lot of the plastics end up affecting this very biodiversity that we need to protect. And plastics are also working against the ocean's economy. Many countries are very small in land, but they're very large in water areas, especially small island states, countries with large coastal regions. And those countries, they lose from plastic waste in various ways, affecting their the fishing industry, affecting their tourism industry, and also causing additional costs for decontamination and plastic recovery. There is one important element that we should always think about, is that we all talk about plastics nationally, the importance to sort materials, the importance to perhaps use reusable things such as glass instead of single-use bottles. Fine, but there is a global push at the moment to create an international treaty under the United Nations, started by the United Nations Environment Assembly, to regulate how plastics are made and traded worldwide. And that it's a very important process that hopefully will create rules in order to disincentivize single-use plastics, the most damaging ones, from being produced and traded as they are today. UNCTAD, as part of the SME program, produced examinations looking in Africa and South Asia. For example, in Africa, we had examinations for Kenya and Nigeria, the issue of plastic substitution. So, of course, when we talk about substitution, to change plastics for something else, we need to consider, is this something else going to be competitive? Like, can I produce this something else? A paper cup, a jute bag, an algae-based container, in a competitive way, in a way that I can also still keep the bottom line of companies and keep perhaps enough scale in order to meet the demand for transportation, for protection, for barrier that plastics provide. So this study looks at various options for material substitution, looking at the competitiveness in countries and also the environmental consequences, not only of plastics, but also of the plastic substitutes. We are expanding this analysis to a larger group of plastic substitutes. This study is very targeted, and now we are about to publish another study looking at mapping 282 types of plastic substitutes in world trade. So there are a lot of plastic substitutes around. It's not a matter of developing them; they are already there. They are a market of over $360 billion per year. Plastics is, by the way, is around $1.2 trillion per year. That's the international trade of plastics in all their forms. Substitutes is around 1/4 of that, more or less. We, since we are a trade agency, that we have to work with the trade and environment aspect of things. For example, when we discuss plastic or pollution to the water, such as plastic pollution, we need to be precise. The way to be precise is to identify the codes that are used in world trade for the potential substitutes with their HS, equivalent HS codes, and provide this to countries for them to consider potential tariff liberalization, for example, to reduce tariffs on plastic substitutes and potentially to increase tariffs on single-use plastics. That's a very important way to change what enters the country, what companies adopt, what consumers end up having, and indirectly change the amount of plastics leaking into waterways in countries. And this is a big problem in East Africa. I've been to Kenya and Tanzania recently doing documentaries, and I've seen that even with a plastic waste bag ban, how hard and severe the situation is into the outskirts of Dar es Salaam. And there's still a lot of plastic litter there, even after the severe policies adopted by the country. So, but of course, plastic substitutes involve the materials, right? So like paper, cotton, but also the products, like a paper bag or cotton bag or a paper cup. We ideally want countries to be able to not only change their material structure to a potentially more sustainable one, but also be able to add value, not only to export paper, pulp, or raw cotton beans, but to be able to make the cotton bag. So I have these higher value-added products as a new productive capacity, as a new commercial asset that they can sell, that they can make jobs in doing. One thing that we notice is that often import tariffs for plastics are lower than the import tariffs for substitute materials. If you look at, I forgot to highlight here, But if you look at a paper cup, generally a paper cup is more expensive to import in a country than a plastic cup. And that's one of the distortions that we are telling countries that can be corrected in order to reduce plastic pollution reaching the waterways and the environment. One important thing that we also say is that there's no free lunch. So once you change something for another, let's say a plastic bottle for an aluminum bottle, or a plastic bag for a cotton bag, the alternative, so that what is substituting, also has their own impacts, and often the impacts are on water. For example, this picture here, which shows the impacts of using life cycle analysis of material substitution from plastic to something else in Kenya. It's a country study. It shows that a cotton bag, for example, the green bar in the lower part of the graph, has, for example, very high water consumption. It has a very high fresh water ecotoxicity and very high ozone formation. Those are standard categories that scientists use to analyze the impact of a material according to the life cycle, so from production, transformation to disposal. And it shows that okay, if we are going to go for natural materials to replace plastics, we should be very careful on their own impact on water systems, for example, because we don't want to have a system that an economy that is free of plastics. Great, but it has polluted water really bad. So we want to have the best of both worlds. So the management of the agricultural system, transformation of the agricultural products, so for example, cotton, has to be carefully managed and used the best available or near best available technologies and practices to reduce this leakage of pollution into the systems. We have a bunch of projects in Africa which might be interesting for the journalists in attendance. Some of them, one in Kenya, the flip-floppy project in Lambo archipelago. We also have projects in Ghana working on juice making, sort of finding additional alternative materials for conventional plastics in the juice production value chain. Also projects in Nigeria working on biodegradable mulch films and also recovery of floating plastics debris that is on rivers with the Givo project, River Cycle Limited, that's in Ghana. And I'm happy to send more information about what those projects are doing. We are actually gonna visit some of them in a couple of weeks in the countries, and they are providing us with the concrete cases about which to talk and to bring the lessons to the multilateral level. For example, in the negotiations of the plastics treaty. Let me talk a bit about the manufacturing pollution. So the twin side of this map. Plastics is one arm. The manufacturing pollution is another arm. We did a study on the role of exports in manufacturing pollution, because often when you think about the product, for example, a container of salt, we think that this product, or we feel that this product was born in the supermarket shelf. And of course, that wasn't the case. There's a whole production chain behind before the supermarket shelf. Well, and that releases pollution in the environment. And once something is produced to be exported, it also casts a shadow of pollution during its production up to the point of exports. That is important for countries to manage, and is important for the exporter and the importer to share the responsibility for the pollution in the production, in the producing country. So this is a complex term. Information on pollution and environmental performance of things usually don't cross the border with the product. And we've been trying to work with partners in the sponsorship of the UK to put more light on this, because there's a whole interest, exponential interest going on the theme of product passports. So information being attached to products so that we know how they were produced, at which carbon footprint, at which water footprint. And it's something that is going to probably mark the future of trade. This graph is the special graph that I like. It shows it gives a dimension of the pollution challenge. So on the left side, you can see some economic sectors. On the middle side, you can see some types of pollutants. There are many types of pollutants. And on the right side of the graph, you can see the potential solutions that can be used. There's, for every type of solution, for air particulates, for water discharges, for solid particles in water, for heavy metals, for organic matters, there's always one type or more than one type of technical solution available. Sometimes those technical solutions produce things that are valuable. For example, a slaughterhouse or a tannery that produces organic residues. These organic residues can cause a lot of damage to water if they are released from the slaughterhouse, from a tannery directly into the water system. Or they can have, for example, a biodigester or an intermediate process that can produce fertilizer and energy, especially heat for industrial processes as a bonus, and detoxify the final sludge that reaches the water system. So the important thing is to make sure that those intermediate steps are adopted in countries and improve the quality of the runoff coming out from industry, especially in the developing world. To illustrate visually what I'm talking about, this is some photos from a tannery. The tanneries use a lot of water, a lot of dye, a lot of chemicals, and they use also heavy metals like chromium. And this chromium has to be contained in a tank for a while to be processed by biological processes to be detoxified, and then there needs to be a treatment to remove this chromium from the soils and potentially reuse it in the process. But again, those pictures are from a fairly well managed tannery. Imagine one that isn't. So it's a quite tough sector. We all use leather, but it casts out a very high shadow of pollution, especially it can do it pollution in water. This is a spring grad that I took from a recent mission to Kenya, the outskirts of Nairobi, near the eastern bypass. It's a photo from the outside of a tannery. It's a very delicate site and produces a lot of solid residue, water residue. There is a treatment system in this tannery, but of course probably not enough. But there is also not enough support or public policy instruments to help the industrialists to adopt those. So financing is also very limited. So there are a lot of pressure points that end up causing the constant release of polluted water into the water systems of cities. This is a shot from Pakistan, also from a recent mission. That's also from a tannery. You see the water intensity. A tannery is full of water. It's very intense water usage for the processes, for the cleaning, to wash to dye to treat the leather skins, the hides with chromium. And you, in an ideal scenario, and I'm not sure I'll do that, you would have a treatment tank to separate the polluted, the solid parts from the water, with biological processes, aerobic or anaerobic. And then in the end, it's still not great, but it's better than nothing. The Pyrex to the right shows a treated water out of the tannery, and the Pyrex to the left shows an untreated water. Some tanneries do release the untreated water into rivers, and that you can imagine the impact on that on fish, on local fisheries, on the food that people consume on agricultural sites, and so on. So in order to support this thing, we cannot, countries cannot regulate what they don't know, right? You need to have.
Henrique.
Yes, I'm converging.
Hi, Henrique.
Yeah.
Hi, Henrique. I barely have 5 minutes left for you.
Sure. I'm ready. I'm going towards the end. So we have produced a dashboard showing the data connecting this production and export flows. So for us to know what is the shadow of pollution behind export flows. And this is just a screen graph from the case of Kenya again, showing the life cycle just from cradle to gate, meaning from the agricultural site in the field up to the factory gate. So when you look at sectors like food and beverages, you can see that there is a high effect on land use, 32%. You have a high We have a visible effect on marine eutrophication, so damage to seawater. We have water consumption effects from those industries. So the idea is to have a tool that shows that for each type of production or economic sector, where are the environmental damages spread, and water, be it fresh water or marine systems or water consumption, water is everywhere. Water is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, impact of industry in the world. So just to finalize, perhaps worth noticing for those in attendance, that we are going to have two activities that are important, I believe, for the East African community. The first is a training that we are in discussions with the Africa Legal Network to organize a training for plastic pollution authorities in the governments of the 7 EEC countries, probably to be hosted in Kenya. And these discussions will result in an outcome document, even if an informal one that we use to feed into the international negotiations being carried out on the plastics treaty. We also having a training for tanneries officials in Kenya, together with the Technical University of Kenya. And we are going to have a soon result of 2 calls for proposals that we had on the textile industry, because textiles are also very intensive water pollution, and the food and beverage industries. Why those sectors? Because those are major sectors for the economies of African and South Asian countries, the countries that we work with. And we are likely to also work with Africa 21 as well, and we're looking forward to that. So that is it from my side. I won't have time to answer questions because I have a meeting dress right now. But please, if you have questions, write us an email, either to Glenn or myself. I'm going to make this presentation available to Julian from Africa 21, and you can access it. It's authorized to be distributed. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Henrique, and thank you very much. Plastic pollution, I think, is a major one, and even the kind of impacts that it has on not just fauna and flora, but also on the water quality. For example, it has been found that a lot of polluted by plastic, even the water that sometimes we think is really purified still has some elements of the plastic. So I think it's a big issue that journalists really need to cover. But my question to you is that what that you think from your presentation, the headline for tomorrow? If you had to write a headline from your presentation, what do you think it would be? Let it be a headline of 2 texts and not more than 7 words.
There are 2 dimensions to this problem, like the national dilemmas and the multilateral one. If there is one thing that I would wish to happen is to have, for talking about plastics, is to have a more active voice from Africa in the negotiations towards a global plastics agreement. So the countries from East Africa, together or individually, together, to put forward more suggestions, because many countries adopted laws banning single-use plastic bags, and they have experience with the results. I think this experience is very valuable for what the world is trying to do for all the UN members. So I wish that East Africa could be more active and proactive into the global plastic pollution negotiations.